Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Hello, I'm Stephen Willis with an extra edition of the Locked On Ole Miss podcast with David Eckert from the Clarion Ledger. It's Egg Bowl week. We're talking to everybody that's anybody around Ole Miss sports. How you doing, David?
I'm doing great, Stephen. It's good to be back on. How are you, man?
Pretty good. And just like we did with Dalen's video, real quick, we're going to start off. Coach O winning the battle for Atlantis. I don't care. They did beat Michigan. I do not know if any signs got stolen in this basketball competition. But Coach O, it was a boat race. She won by 21 points, the Lady Rebels did. I think that the pollsters overreacted a little bit after the loss to Oklahoma and dropping them down to 23rd.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, it's a good basketball team, right? Like, there is, to me, when you defend the way that the Ole Miss women have in the last year, 3 years under Coach Yo, like, you're never going to be bad. You know, you're always going to have a floor. And look, that doesn't mean that you don't lose one here and then, but you're going to get consistent performances. And you know, they kind of got back to those defensive principles this week. You look at some of those box scores. I think the most points they allowed in any of those 5 games was 54, which is, you know, ridiculous. And obviously, I think Arizona and Michigan were both unbeaten coming into their games against Ole Miss. So, you know, pretty good teams. Impressive showing.
And it's gotten to the point where if you win the Battle of Atlantis, you've had a good tournament. That's one of the go-to tournaments right now in college basketball. So congratulations again to Coach Yo. Let's move on to the battle for the Golden Egg because that is the official name of the competition, David, not the Egg Bowl, which was created by the Clarion Ledger way back when. Is there building like newspaper clippings hanging up for the original Egg Bowl type stuff around the office?
So I'm going to confess, I've been to the Clarion Ledger office exactly one time. And I wasn't even supposed to be there when I was there. I was helping out with the Dandy Dozen, and I thought that, you know, we would meet at the Clarion Ledger office, but really we were meeting at a high school football field. So that's the only time I've ever been there. But so I don't know, but it's cool that we can play a little bit of a part in the lore, I guess.
Yeah, and honestly, for those who do not know, the reason the Egg Bowl is called the Egg Bowl is because the Clarion Ledger needed something to cover because Ole Miss football and state football was really bad in the late 70s and early 80s. So that started the whole thing. And now the Egg Bowl is the Egg Bowl. It has a completely different meaning, and we've kind of rebranded it a little bit. So as an outsider, you know, coming in and seeing this rivalry, what are your impressions?
You know, I think I last year was my first one. So maybe not one that Ole Miss fans loved, but I think kind of encapsulated the chaos, you know. It was, I don't know, I loved it. Like and you know, this is a game that I watched, you know, growing up as well. So obviously I've seen the chaos, but it was cool to see it firsthand. And that game was just so ridiculous. I mean, just the antics. Sorry, my cat has Egg Bowl takes as well. But the antics and everything kind of aside, you know, you just, that game, Ole Miss was in such command early. Then it just looked like State was going to blow them out, and all of a sudden, you know, it comes down to a 2-point conversion. So, yeah, I loved it. You know, we'll see if we get the same kind of chaos this week. I don't necessarily know that these teams are capable of playing a normal football game. It seems like they're not. So that's what I think really when I think Egg Bowl is. I just think shenanigans, chaos, like something unexpected is going to happen.
Yeah, and people don't realize that outsiders, they're worried that it's like viewed as a circus sideshow. That's what whenever people talk about the end of Thanksgiving Day sideshow, Mississippians kind of need to embrace that though. I mean, this is their game. This is what the calendar revolves around it. Now, if you can't enjoy the absurdity, like literally a windblown field goal is in the lore of this game. And
Yeah.
I was actually at that game, by the way, along with 300,000 of my closest friends. Uh, but there's just crazy stuff. There was Eli Manning throwing a ball that gets kicked up in the air and intercepted. And that was an increasingly weird play, I think. And I mean, I think we just need to enjoy the shenanigans. Now we need to get the stupid stuff out of the game. Now I think that needs to happen. But the unexpected and the funness of this game, this is one of, in my opinion, one of the top 5 rivalries in all of college sports. Not necessarily because of rankings and stakes and things like that, just because the actual game and how much it means to everybody that's watching it.
No question about it. One of my favorite things that I've done since I've had this job was last year on Egg Bowl week. I spent, I don't know, maybe 18 hours reading. I found a newspaper clipping for every Egg Bowl, and I ranked the best Egg Bowls from each decade. And it's just like the amount of just hilarious, awesome stuff that I found doing that was incredible. But I think you're right. The Egg Bowl to me is what I like about college sports and what I kind of worry that we're losing. When we transition toward, everything's about the college football playoff, everything's about crowning a national championships, everything's about TV ratings. And, the Egg Bowl to me is regional, it's passionate, and it's fun. And I think that's what college sports should be. I think, it's important that this is protected. So really looking forward to it for sure.
So, what are your expectations for the game Thursday night?
Yeah, it's interesting. Ole Miss kind of had one of those weird ones this weekend where they win by 32 and you don't think that they played very well. It's, offensively not great until the second half. Defensively, maybe a little bit concerned about the way that ULM ran the ball. But generally, I mean, you don't give up a touchdown, that's fine. But yeah, I think, I think they'll be in command. I expect Ole Miss to win the game. I think defensively, to me, I'm kind of at a point where I think Ole Miss's defense it might be better than the offense, just with how this is going. Obviously, State's offense has struggled this year, so I think this is a game that the Ole Miss defense is going to take command of. I expect that pass rush to get going. Maybe that hasn't really happened the last couple of weeks. That's been missing. I think they need to fix that. But I expect them to generate 1 or 2 turnovers, win the turnover battle like they do just about every week. And yeah, I think they'll have enough explosive plays on offense. They might have some ugly drives. I think the weather is going to be a little bit cold. I was looking at the forecast, so maybe not a great night for offensive football, but they'll be explosive enough on offense, and defensively, I think they're going to have a really good night. I think Ole Miss will win the game.
Yeah, the funny thing is on today's show, Locked On Ole Miss podcast, we talked about how Pete Golding, his defense has just feasted on average to below average offenses this year and held 5 teams. They're at 5 teams right now that they've held below 300 yards. Now, this is an Ole Miss football team that, I don't know, 4 years ago, when you hold a team to 30 points, that was a good defensive performance. I don't think Ole Miss fans know how to deal with what Pete Golding is actually doing. And this is with players that are not recruited for a system. They're not fits. He's just making do. This is all schematic at this point.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. Like, Ole Miss has decent defensive talent. I think they do not have, upper tier SEC defensive talent, in my opinion. So I do think that they've overachieved based on their scheme. And, I think what we fail to do in the discourse about the Ole Miss defense a lot of times too is take into account the pace that the offense plays with and the extra opportunities with each game that provides the opposing offense to go score points. So just with that math equation, right? Like it's more difficult for the Ole Miss defense. So you do have to kind of grade them on a curve. And I just think they've been really good. If you have last year's Ole Miss defense, I mean, do they beat Arkansas? Do they beat Auburn? Do they beat Tulane?
Yeah.
So that's been a really important upgrade in my opinion. And yeah, I think Pete Golding's done a great job.
Yeah, I think the secret sauce that we're finding out with Lane, because even the last year of DJ Durkin and the Sugar Bowl year, the year that the defense was just average, not even good, just average, Ole Miss has been in a position to win 10 regular season games. And I think that there's probably a lesson that can be taken from that. I think Lane is still learning how to coach to a defensive football team, and he's trying to figure out how to tweak his system because he can't give it up. The speed is what they do. I mean, but I think that you're going to see Ole Miss over the next little bit, the next 2 or 3 years as this grows, you're going to see them punt a little bit more. You're going to see them willing to put the defense out on the field and things like that, even though they're going to be fast regardless, because like I said, that's kind of what they are.
Yeah, I do think you look at it's this 2024 recruiting class, right? You look at what you got in Centurion Perkins, like they are going to start having, if everything goes to plan, that elite defensive talent, that top tier SEC talent. So once, that kind of arrives and matures, I'll be really interested to see what that looks like. And like you said, what kind of impact that has on some of the offensive decisions that they make.
Yeah, it should be quite interesting and well. So who do you think stars on Thanksgiving night? You talked about the weather a little bit earlier. Mississippi State's front seven. I'm not going to say they're good, but their linebackers are really good. They have 2 NFL linebackers potentially. So you have to think they're going to be keying on Q. I know that Lane Kiffin is all about pack your defense and your run game whenever you play on the road. Is this a game that Ulysses Bentley finally goes off?
Maybe, I think he'll get the chances to. Yeah, this is one of those games to me where I think Ole Miss's depth is going to be very important, and Ulysses Bentley is part of that, right? Because Ole Miss is deeper than Mississippi State. Ole Miss's top tier talent is better than Mississippi State's, and in my opinion, I don't think Mississippi State has the answers lower down, the depth chart that Ole Miss has. And when you're playing physical football, when it's cold, that type of thing starts to matter. So, it could be a Ulysses Bentley game for sure. This kind of feels like a Dayton Wade game to me. I don't know. I don't really have any logical reason for that, but it's just, hey, there are all these threats offensively that Ole Miss has to take, that State has to account for on the Ole Miss end. Maybe Dayton Wade's not at the top of that list, and obviously what he's capable of. Defensively, Cedric Johnson, I think will have a good day. He's somebody I think, talking to the players today, really seems to buy into like the Egg Bowl and what it is and why it matters. And obviously he's had some injury problems, been unavailable for some of these. So I think it'll be a big night for him. Yeah. To me on offense, I like the Ulysses Bentley shout. I think some of the secondary pieces are gonna have big nights.
Yeah, and the other thing that you mentioned, I just want to throw this by you real quick. With as much as those 2 linebackers are, Nathaniel Watson and Jet Johnson, I think Caden Prieskorn and Jordan Watkins are 2 players to watch in this game as well, kind of just replacing where they blitz from, and Ole Miss does some pop pass type stuff. Yeah,
and they got Prieskorn involved in the pass game, really for the first time. Against ULM, he was good. That has been one of the surprises of the season for me, and maybe it has a little bit to do with the injury that he had preseason, but I was expecting a little bit more in the passing game from him. Obviously, when you have those 3 weapons, maybe that changes things, but maybe this is another game for him to feast.
Absolutely. Thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. David Eckert, Clarion Ledger, joining the show. Thank you very much for stopping by, David, and we'll talk to you next time, bud.
Appreciate it, Steven.